Hello and welcome to today's painting demonstration. My name is Leah and I teach acrylic painting tutorials on my channel. So if you love that, then I would love it if you would subscribe. Today I'm going to show you how to paint another seasonal fall landscape, and we have a lake this time with a lot of warm reflections, and we are hoping to pull your eye to this brightly lit tree and then off into the far distance. So there's going to be some light popping through some overcast clouds. This is going to be cool color dominant as opposed to our other painting tutorials this fall that have been more warm dominant. So that's going to be a little bit different, but it is going to highlight this tree even more. So for the reference for this painting, it is in my art community Discord server, and the links to that are below. And I'm doing a lot on Instagram these days as well. I am doing open studios in Santa Cruz County. If you're local to the Santa Cruz County, California area, make sure to check that out. I am artist number 230, and that will be the next 2 weekends, so that's super exciting. I'm going to pick up my large filbert brush, and I'm starting with my burnt sienna here. Get a little bit of water in the brush because I want this to stay transparent. I've done some not super detailed sketching, but enough to make sure that I stay on track. I want these proportions to stay correct. I'm using the rule of thirds, and in most of my compositions I will tend to use the rule of thirds. I think that it helps keep things on track, and as long as you have a either central focal point or your painting pulls you into the distance, then you're going to be good to go. So I'm starting with the darkest values of my painting. And I want to keep the paint over where I want it to be darker, but I don't need to fuss too much about it. Sometimes I will. This side here will be a big shadowed area. That will give our background light some good contrast. Now with horizontal brush strokes and those reflections, I'm going to come down and darken the corner of our piece. And then on the other side as well. Adding a little bit of water to my paintbrush to get our medium value in. Let's see, gotta refer to the reference. And then our lightest values, just adding more water to the brush again. We can use this much water in acrylic paint when we are using this technique on paper, on porous material. Because we're using porous material, it does not need to be a super stable paint layer because it is going all the way into that paper. Alright, that is looking pretty good, and this is also going to dry super quickly because it's porous and it's not particularly cold or humid in here. I'm going to start inside the clouds. Up in the top of our painting, I'm going to be using the smaller filbert brush for this. And I have pre-mixed from the previous tutorial this dark value This is half ultramarine blue and half burnt sienna. So that's what I'm grabbing there. I'm gonna pull it over next to my cerulean blue, put a little bit of cerulean blue in there, and then drag some white over as well. Okay, that's a nice overcast sky gray. Just put a little bit more white on there. Now I'm going to start in the corners and go towards what would be the lighter area. The fog that I have planned for this lake scene is going to be exploding out of that. I guess it could be either a sunrise or a sunset. Depending on what fictional lake this is. Now, while that is still wet, I'm going to grab some titanium white and blend it. I'm using swirly brush strokes. And when you do that with the filbert, you get a lot of cloudy type of variation. I'm going to wipe my brush off right now, grab a little bit more white and keep on blending. And dragging that paint a little bit further, because as I come to that spot where I want the light, I want a little bit of the underpainting warmth to show through. That'll give us a luminous glow. Adding a few more bright white cloud shapes here. Give that sky a little bit more interest. Now I'm going to let that dry. If I need to add a little bit more warmth here, I will later. But the paints are super thin and transparent, and when you're using water, they'll dry even more transparent than when you initially put them down, so it is okay to wait and to layer up. So now I'm going to go to the background trees. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch flat for this. Using the darkest value, I'm going to drag a little bit of cerulean blue and a little bit of cadmium yellow. Looking for a muted evergreen color. Ooh, might need to pull in some ultramarine blue for that, actually. I don't want this green to be acidic. I want it to be fairly muted. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of white on one side. That looks good. I'm going to start up here, and with the brush very particularly angled, I'm going to push the brush up into the sky. Paint around those tree shapes that I'll be adding in the next round. And it's going to be a little bit of a trick because there is some fog on this mountain. back there. Not yet though, not until it gets a little bit closer to the middle. About here is when it's going to start to diffuse. I hope you'll see how muted this green is. It's almost a gray. Grabbing more white as I come down. If you move quickly, you can mix the paint on your painting, but it's scary because you really have a limited amount of time. Lighter and lighter as we come to the end of this horizon. Then I'm going to wipe everything off my brush really quick, rinse that out with water, and I'm going to blend this last little bit up into the sky. Make that blend kind of subtle. There's some fog. That I'm blending in, and it's a little bit awkward blending fog with a flat brush, but I'm using the tip as if it were a point, and that's not too bad. It can be done. You just have to make sure to do some circular brush strokes, and there's not too much moisture in your brush. I go one more pass with a white gray. Not everything needs to be super blended. You can have some strategic hard edges on these clouds. Make them look like they're traveling across this tree area in the back. And now more fog as we come to the top of the lake. And this is going to be kind of a blurred line, which I quite like. A little bit more white right at the horizon line. All right, and then now onto the water. I'm using just titanium white because I want just the most subtle, that's not subtle, the most subtle water's edge. Doesn't even need to be visible on about half of it, just as long as your eye kind of subtly picks up on that. And then we're going to be doing some reflection work, so I'm going to grab some of that green and using horizontal brush strokes. I'm going to be working my way back to that medium green. These colors are pretty lovely. Love that soft sage. Okay. That looks pretty good. That's our cool dominant. Now I'm going to go into our mid-ground with that dark evergreen color. I'm going to start over here on the left side. I may need to mix a little bit more of this, so I'm going to grab the ultramarine blue with that dark value and some cadmium yellow. Oof, not too much though. You'll see me rotating the angle of this flat brush to create these tree shapes. Careful though, if you do have too much water in the brush, you'll get blobs. So I'm wiping most of that paint out, scraping off my brush and then starting fresh. Just dragging up ever so gently to the top of that small little tree top, and then coming down, trying not to make too symmetrical of a pine tree. We are on that bank. Now when I get to that bank, I'm going to use horizontal brush strokes and just drag those pine tree colors all the way down. I'm going to overlap onto our blue-gray a bit, and the brush strokes will get a little bit bigger as we come into the foreground. Okay, now for the evergreen trees on the right side. There's one here that's going to be behind our focal point. This one is going to make the orange tree pop even more. And the rest of these are a little closer in that background mountain value. That is on purpose. I do not want those to pull your eye quite as much as the other trees. But you know, there's only a couple thousand trees in this painting. I think we're doing really well on our painting trees per hour. Which is how I like to measure the speed of my painting tutorials. Trees per hour. Official measurement. Painting around some of those negative shapes. And of course we'll add some more negative shapes to our foreground reflections and also to our orange tree. Now reflections. I think it's very interesting to have some separated shapes. Especially as you come towards the foreground. As if there is a little bit of a undulation or a wave in the water. I think right. Well, let's see. There we go. Now this little island here is kind of this rocky, it's rocky, it's green, it's dark. It's slightly warm in some parts, but not in others. Let's just go with this medium toned brown, and then I'll lighten it up in some spots, maybe darken it down at the base here. Using these diagonal brush strokes, I think that'll give it some texture. I don't want to go too high definition, because you go too high definition, then the drawing, the accuracy of your details starts to matter. And I'd rather let the viewer figure out what's going on with their own eye. There we are. Okay, now the reflection. Going to incorporate some of that brown into the green reflection that we put in just a moment ago. Now, before I forget, I am gonna use the #1 liner that I have on hand, and just with a very, very light, transparent paint, we're going with the light cool gray and a fair amount of water. I'm gonna angle that brush in the palette and just add a little bit of subtle bank edge. And it's not going to be like a full consistent line, it's just going to be some little, just a gentle hint. A little bit of negative painting on some of those shapes, those reflection shapes. Same treatment on the other side. Great. Now I'm going to switch to a small point brush for this fall tree. Cadmium yellow, cadmium red. Maybe a little bit more yellow than red. It'll depend on the strength of your pigments. And I'm just going to smash some paint on there with the point brush. I'm going to add some yellow towards the sun side, and maybe a little bit more red towards the shadow side. Both red and yellow are quite transparent, so might have to layer up after the first round dries. You'll just have to see how you fare. Now I'm going to add some burnt sienna to this, what is now a dark earthy orange. So I don't want that red is so intense and bright. Alright, now I'm coming back, seeing what needs more paint. I'm going to add a little bit of this orange, mix it in very vaguely, and I'm going to drag the paint so that it's pretty transparent, just to imply that there's more fall trees back here peeking through these evergreens, these really powerful green evergreens. And of course I can add a little bit of that to the reflection as well. I'm going to do the same thing on the left side, this time to imply kind of the top of the bank. Just if you do something up in the trees, kind of hit that just subtly in the reflection as well. Just when you're in the reflection, remember to do horizontal brush strokes. I'm gonna go back to the yellow, add it to that earthy orange, and integrate the yellow and the orange side. Using a lot of pouncing here. I'm going to add just a little bit and very subtle, lots of water in the brush, very, very light earthy orange. I'm going to add that way back here, right above the fog line in that background. Rinsing out the brush, and I'm just going to blend that in. Everything's dry back there, so it's not going to hurt it. You don't scrub too hard, it will not hurt it. Use that same yellow, very light, where our sun is radiating from. This time I'm gonna drag it over the clouds as if the sun is peeking through. I'm going to pick up that liner again, and with the darker gray and a good amount of water in my brush, I am going to sharpen that tip very delicately. Put some trunks up these evergreen trees. That'll help break up the expanse of just darkness. You do not need them to connect to the ground. You also do not need it to be a full line. It's actually better if they're not a full line. Keep your intervals as mixed as you can. Remember to make them. Okay, that is doing much better. Just gonna do a couple little horizontal lines, some little branch. Okay, so these little trees back here are bothering me just a little bit. I think the earthy orange needs to come into play. I'm gonna add a little bit of our brown to that dark orange. Is it too dark though? A little bit of white. There we go. Don't go too intense into your fog zone. You're going to need to add a little bit of water to your brush and kind of blend that in, make it real soft. Make sure your intervals, check your intervals. That is so key. Humans are so good at picking up on patterns. Okay, that's a lot better. Now in the reference image, there's a little person in a little tiny canoe, and originally I was not thinking about adding it. So right now I'm pondering that. I am. But first I'm going to add some little branch shapes to our fall trees now that our evergreen branches are at least dry on the right side. Just remember, these do not need to be connected to anything. They should be really small. This one I'm going to connect. Okay, now to cut in some negative shapes. They're going to be pretty small, so I'm using the small point. This is a number 1. When you cut in tree shapes, try to do them in groups of 3 to 5 and make sure that they are, maybe one big shape and then some smaller ones, and angle them at different angles. But little groups works best. Okay, now for the light gray side. And then when it gets down into the fog, remember to pull more white in. Right, that really did it for those. I think that really makes a tree so much more interesting when there's some reveal coming through from the background, from the previous layer. So I'm going to try to do that for these pine trees. Of course, the branches are a lot different there, so it's going to look a lot different. You just need to pay attention to what is behind the tree. What color is behind that tree? The boat. Did we do the boat? Do we have time to do the boat? We do. We're ahead of schedule, so. let's try out the boat. So I'm scared because it's so small, so I'm just gonna use my really, really sharp mechanical pencil. Everything is dry here, so I can set my hand down, which is nice. And just, it's gonna go right, not in the middle. But off towards the right side. And then the person will not be in the middle of the boat. Things look better when they're in a ratio of 60 to 40. I didn't make the rule, I just heard about it. There we are. Now, with a warmer gray, warmer medium gray, and a very, very sharp point brush, I'm just going to delicately, oh so delicately, paint over this shape that I've made. And the head got a little bit bigger, but that's okay. This person's wearing a hat. And then I'm going to leave just a little bit of separation between the boat and the reflection of the boat. I put a little bit more water in my brush, so the reflection itself is going to be a little bit lighter. Not much, just a little. And there's the person. Okay, I think that did it. That's nice. Has a story. Now I think it's definitely morning. I think this scene is definitely morning time. Maybe this person was fishing, or maybe they were just going for a morning row. Adding a little bit of highlight to some of these clouds. Just towards that sun area. Really vague. Staying really vague there. Vague and loose. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you liked this painting tutorial. And until next time, next Wednesday, happy painting!